Well, good evening again. My name is Devin Ackman, and I'm the director of the MSU Museum, and I have the pleasure of welcoming those of you who are in house tonight, as well as those of you joining us through the live stream tonight for our program, Building a Legacy, Inside the Journey to Establish the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Latino, with founding director Jorge Zamanillo. Thank you. First and foremost, before we begin, I just really want to thank our partners for making tonight's event a reality. Of course, we're here in the studio of WKAR, so our gratitude to them for their partnership, for hosting us, and for putting together a live stream so that folks near and far could join us remotely and making this a more accessible event. We also would like to thank our friends in the Chicano Latino Studies program for partnering us. Isabel, I hope this is the first of many partnerships to come as we look to the future of uplifting culture here on campus, so thank you as well. I also have to make notice real quick of the fact that the Smithsonian, so yes, our guest is from the Smithsonian, but as some of you may know, our museum, the MSU Museum, is actually an affiliate of the Smithsonian. In fact, we are the first affiliate in the state of Michigan. And I'm often asked, like, what does that mean? And I like to best explain it as it's simply a reciprocal relationship that enables us to bring wonderful things from Washington, D.C., our national set of museums, including experts like Jorge, here to Michigan, and it allows us to reciprocate and send stuff back to Washington. So what is a quick example of that? If you come to the MSU Museum right now, you'll have a chance to see an exhibition called Knowing Nature, Stories of the Boreal Forest. We are the first venue in the country to host this new Smithsonian exhibition, which is wonderful, of course. But in turn, we have students who are working to provide materials for the Smithsonian in return. We are designing a game to gamify that exhibition so young children could deepen their experiences with the content in the exhibit. And we're also working on an accessibility project to make that exhibition more available to those with visibility issues. So as you can see, this is truly a reciprocal relationship, something we're really proud of, and something we're delighted to continue. And I see tonight as another extension in that fold. Of course, we have to thank our sponsor for tonight, and this program is indeed supported by the Diana Rivera and Pedro Rivera Mexican and American Culture Endowment. This is the first true event to date, utilizing income from that fund, and we're looking forward to many more activities in the years to come. So a round of applause for the Riveras, please. Now I have to warn you, I might get a little casual tonight, so if this doesn't seem overly formal, forgive me. I have to say I've known Jorge here now for, 5 or 6 years. Yeah, we served together on the board of the American Alliance of Museums, and in addition to being a founding director of a museum, this guy is also the chair of a national board. So I do not envy the tasks that he has, but I do truly value the relationship I've been able to build with Jorge over the years. And it's National Hispanic Heritage Month, and this guy is flying all over the country. So the fact that he made time to come here to join us on the campus of Michigan State University is really special, and we're just really honored to have you here for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So who is Jorge? That's an existential question, right? So Jorge, you've been with the Smithsonian now, I think, for about a year, almost a year and a half, but his professional journey in museums is been going back to the turn of the century, right? You started with History Miami as a curator, and then kind of became a deputy director and held various roles, and ultimately became the director and led that institution through quite a bit of growth. And expansion and doing wonderful activities, and has now springboarded into this new role in Washington, D.C., which is really phenomenal coming from such an important, that was a Smithsonian affiliate museum as well. So here we are today at this new national treasure. For those of you who have been to Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian is actually a collections of museums. It's not a singular museum. And in December of 2020, Congress passed a bill calling for a National Museum of American Latino. So first and foremost, before we really jump in, just what does that mean, do you think, for American Latinos from across the country to have a museum eventually in Washington, D.C.?
Well, first of all, thank you all for joining us tonight, and to the Rivera family and everyone else here today. This is really an honor to join you. And Devin, thank you for those kind words. I'm also glad I didn't wear a gray suit with a blue shirt, because you're going to be looking. I'm always worried about that. But I truly appreciate your support here tonight. When the bill was enacted in 2020, it was really such a pivotal moment, and it was really a reflection on over almost 3 decades of people working to push for the legislation just to be even considered a museum to be built on the National Mall. It took forever. It really did. So I really got to give a shout out to all those people that were involved with that way before I was. I always tell people this is the kind of the final phase, the easier part, even though it's not at all. It's just getting, as you know, getting anything passed in Congress these days. It's really difficult. So that, for them to do that in December 2020, it took a lot of hard work and years of perseverance. But it's really about what our community is, right? That it takes that long to get anything done, sadly, and it's through this incredible effort and resiliency and the hard work of so many people to get where we are today. And that's why the museum is so important, that it finally have a physical presence in DC, finally have a place that has representation for our communities, and finally have a space where you can go and see your stories being told in a museum on the National Mall, and that's really important for us.
Thank you for that. So I've got a series of questions for Jorge, but we also want to make this participatory. So if you have questions, I have 2 colleagues, one on each side, and simply raise your hand and they'll pass you an index card and you could write your question and hand it back to them, and we'll incorporate that in a little while. So start thinking as we're having our conversation up here, okay? So can you tell us a bit about the moment you learned you would be leading the National Museum of American Latino, and what did that mean to you personally?
Well, it's the build up to accepting this position. It's over 6 to 7 months of work just to get there, from the initial process when they approach you to be considered for this role. But for me, it was really probably closer to 34, 35 years. Because I always love to tell the story. When I was 18 years old, about to turn 19, I visited DC for the first time. I had just gotten out of high school. I was a music major, actually. I had a scholarship, and I was playing in local salsa merengue bands to make ends meet and pay for school. But I knew I wasn't that good. I knew I could play some gigs here and there, but I knew I couldn't do this for a living.
Just let the cat out of the bag.
Yeah. So of course I visit museums and fall in love with the whole process of telling stories and history and archaeology and anthropology. So I get back home from this week-long trip to DC, which I was able to visit all these museums for free. There's no barrier, right? You walk around, you get to experience them all. It was also the middle of January. It was about 3 feet of snow on the ground, and I had my denim, jacket and jeans, and it was freezing. I was not prepared for this trip, but I had a wonderful time. And I said to myself, it's amazing what you could do with objects and artifacts and telling stories. So I got back home and I switched my major from music to anthropology. And so you can imagine my parents, and if you're from a Latino family, you're like, what, you're not going to be a doctor, an engineer, or an attorney? What is wrong with you? So it was quite a challenge. So I became an archaeologist for the next 10 years. I worked in the field, and because I love studying the past, I love studying remains and objects. But I also knew that eventually I wanted to go back to work in a museum. And we didn't have any major museums back then in South Florida, but we had some that were growing. And that's when I joined the team at History Miami. So it's kind of like full circle, right? When this opportunity came up in 2021 originally, I said, well, I don't know if I want to pick up after 46 years living in Miami. I was born in New York, and I moved there when I was young, and my wife was born there. And it's like, that's a pretty big decision to pick up and leave your community. I had a great job. I love the people I worked with, and I love my community. And I was so invested in Miami. I knew everybody, and it was kind of easier to get your job done, right, when you're working in a community-based museum. But then I also said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If I don't do this now, I'll probably regret it. And we got to do this right. We need to make sure that we approach this in the right way and we're responsible about it. And we know it's a 10 or 12-year commitment, but think about it. If we don't do this now, are we going to regret it? Are we going to say, in 2 or 3 years, God, I wish I had taken that job because look what's being done now, how incredible! I could probably make it better. I know I could do better than that. And so it's always a challenge. And now I look back though, after a year and a half, like, wow, it was a big risk. But I'm so lucky to have that opportunity though, because it is a full circle event.
So it's great that you're sharing. You're sharing a lot. I didn't know about this also, so I got to talk more about that later. But so you obviously studied museum studies too. You went and studied museum studies, and of course we have students pursuing museum studies here. Much to kind of unpack in that, because I think those early experiences that many of us have, especially in free museums, are the first point in which we actually consider these types of professions, right? Which is really critical, and I think we'll get this in a little while, is how do you encourage more American Latinos to go into the field, right? And to be cultural bearers and preservationists and other things of that nature. But before we get there, I'm really curious. So you alluded to this. So you were in Miami with History Miami for quite some time, and it is a community-based museum. From those experiences of working in Miami, in a very prominent, American Latino city, and a community-based museum, how did that prepare you for this role? I mean, of creating a national institution in Washington, D.C.?
Well, that's an incredible experience. I was there for 21 years, and I was a curator. I was working with expansion projects, construction management later on, and so I think I worked in almost every department. And actually, when I got back to Miami back in 1988, 89, I also worked there part-time as an educator when I was doing archaeology. So I had worked there already in a different capacity, front in the desk, security guard. I had done all these little things while I was going to community college. So it is quite the experience to work in a community-based museum. And when I take on the challenge now of building a national museum, I'm still cognizant that it has to be community-based. And people say, well, how can you do that? Smithsonian, so the bigger picture, it's a national story. But our communities are so diverse. If we don't make it community-based, if we don't go reach out to all these different communities across the U.S. and make sure that their viewpoints, their morals, their values are included in this at that level, it just won't work for us. This is not a typical Smithsonian museum. When you look at what a museum's even going to look like in 10 or 12 years when we open, it's not the same as a storyline that you see today. It might not even be chronological. It might be themes and topics and different ways to explore stories. But we have to be cognizant, again, that when I travel across the United States and meet with all these different communities, like we said before, we're not monolithic, we're not a race, so what are we, right? And that's our responsibility to define what Latinidad is in the Smithsonian. So that's a big challenge.
Yeah, thanks for that. So some of you may know, I got my start at the Arab American National Museum, which isn't a Smithsonian affiliated museum, but it's very similar. It's the idea of building an institution that represents you and uplifts your story. So as that not being a Smithsonian institution, being an affiliate of the Smithsonian, but not a Smithsonian museum, I'm wondering, what does that mean to be a Smithsonian museum? I mean, it's really remarkable. We have lots of ethnic institutions, culturally specific institutions across this country, but there's something special about it being the Smithsonian, having the Smithsonian name and brand on that. What do you think that means, not just for your staff and the folks that are working hard to bring this to fruition, but for communities across this country?
The Smithsonian brand, of course, is special for many people. It's special for myself. It's valued, it's respected, but it also comes with a lot of responsibility on living up to what it should be, right? So we take that seriously. I take that seriously. So I want to make sure that, when you think about building a new museum, you say it's part of the Smithsonian, automatically you're already thinking, well, it has to be the best museum in American Latinos, right? It has to be number one. It's the Smithsonian Museum on this topic. So that's pretty scary when you think about the burden, how daunting that could be. Like, how do you do that? How do you make sure that you live up to that expectation? So it's a challenge, but I think the bigger challenge for us and the bigger opportunity is kind of, like I said before, to redefine what a Smithsonian Museum is. And that's what probably we're going to be tasked to do over the next decade. And I'm sure I'm going to be criticized for it, and a lot of jabs taken at me. It's like, that's not typical Smithsonian. Why are you doing it that way? And I really think we would fail at creating this museum if we don't deviate from the model, right? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Smithsonian Museum today. They're my colleagues as my bosses here. But the expectations are just going to be so different. The museum world has changed over the past 3 or 4 years alone. And it keeps on changing. The way people take in content, the way people digest, the experience coming into a museum, it's completely different than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. And we're constantly being challenged to make sure that we're telling the right stories, that we have representation, that we're diverse. And that's not something that you could do when you work in a Smithsonian Museum, because it's so big, 6,000 employees, and you have a lot of bureaucracy and red tape to get things done just because it's so large. And I'm coming from a community-based museum where I could kick out an exhibit in 6 months and be nimble and quick and react to stories that are happening in the community. And now all of a sudden, I got to take 2 to 3 years to produce an exhibit. It's painful sometimes. Like, this is not good. I mean, we're doing it the right way, but it's also about how do you find the balance, right? How do you find that balance that we need to find in order to make it different?
That's so well said. And just thinking about all those pressures and changes that are happening in the field are quite profound. It feels like we're constantly dealing with accelerated change right now. So again, one of the things. Now, I joined a founding staff and then eventually became the second director of a museum. But one of the things that I kind of had etched in my mind as I heard the origin story over and over and over about the American National Museum is how do you make a vision of something that doesn't exist tangible, right? And I imagine the Smithsonian name certainly adds a lot of weight and credibility as you're meeting with folks and explaining the vision and the work. But what has that process been like as you're kind of going out as the chief representative of the institution and meeting with people and trying to paint a picture of what this institution can be? And how do you feel like the Smithsonian name has helped advance that, or even maybe make it even harder?
Yeah. Well, one of the advantages I had is that there was a Smithsonian Latino Center that was existed for over 25 years. And my deputy director, Eduardo, as we both know, led that for 15 years. And they did an amazing job of really to making sure that Latino stories were being told throughout other Smithsonian museums. There's also a funding Latino initiatives pool through Congress that helps us pay for curatorial work and collections work in each of the Smithsonian museums. And that's being done today still. So we got a jump start. On making sure that there was representation, that we were producing exhibits that travel across the United States, working with different communities across the U.S. That stuff was already started. Now, it's good and bad, right? Because everybody expects, well, you're just a Latino center now. You're just going to add a gallery. You're just going to add a museum. It's like, no, we're completely redefining a new museum, coming up with a different vision and a mission. And that's where, we're doing the typical things that every museum does. We're doing a visioning study now. We're doing strategic planning. We're meeting with community members, we're with stakeholders, with a board, and we're doing the same thing that any size museum does, right? Trying to figure out what is that larger vision. Besides building a museum, what is it? How do you get there? What do the next 5 years look like? What are the goals that we have in mind? So it's the same. Everybody tells me, well, it's a Smithsonian. It gave you a blueprint, and you hand it over, and you just follow the steps. It's like, no, I'm on my own, really. I'm on my own to figure out how to get from A to Z. So it's quite challenging how to do that. But what I have realized, not only from having amazing colleagues at the Smithsonian and throughout the nation, is that where the real information is coming from, where the real facts are coming from, is when I travel across the United States and when I meet with different museums and communities. They're the ones that are telling me, you better make sure you have this, make sure you include this story, make sure you do it the right way, make sure you represent all our diverse communities. And that's where I'm hearing what our vision needs to be, right? What our mission needs to be over the next 10 years. And that's what's defining us.
Yeah, that's so important. And I'm intrigued. I want to go a little bit further with that, where you were leading. And, a little sneak preview, we had dinner before this and was kind of sharing this with Jorge. But, when we were at the American National Museum, we were representing 22 countries and super diverse constituencies, and the same is certainly true of the American Latino community, right? We have folks who have lived generations and generations and generations before there was the United States of America. We have people coming here today. They're coming from various different countries. So, that's a challenge in and of itself, is trying to tell such a myriad stories. Has there been some initial thinking on how that will kind of inform and eventually come to fruition, not just in exhibitions, but programs, education, et cetera?
We're starting to explore that, but there's obvious stories we need to tell, and we know that. We know we go back over 500 years. We know that many people in our community have indigenous roots. We know the story of colonialism. We know struggles and resiliency and activism and all the great things that our community has put up with and achieved. But I also like talking about shared experiences, commonalities. It's like it's a two-sided coin. You have that, and you also have to celebrate the legacies and how far we've come along. I always like sharing the story. I'm a big fan of 23andMe and Family Tree and all these Ancestry.com. And everybody's like, why do you do all the DNA testing? It's like, it's incredible when you go back and you see who your first, second, and third cousins are. And I'll give you an example. My grandfather, went to Cuba from Spain in 1915, and he was one of 6 siblings. 2 of them went to Cuba, 1 went to Mexico, 1 went to Venezuela, 1 went to Argentina. And so I don't know where the other one went, by the way. But when I look at my ancestry and my family tree, I have first cousins that grew up as Mexican American. I have first cousins that grew up as Venezuelans, living in South America, and they're retaining their heritage and they're proud of that or their culture. But now they're living in the United States, and we're defining what it means to be Latino in the United States, an American Latino. And that's my family, and we share that ancestry. But at the same time, I'm Cuban American. He's Mexican American. But then by the end of the day, though, we do share a lot of things. We start talking. What did you grow up doing? How did your mom treat you? Did you have quinces? Did you have this? Did you have to go to those dances? Did you wear a guayabera shirt? I saw a couple of guayaberas here today. Those are all things that we share that goes back hundreds of years in our heritage. And that's when you start exploring those stories. I'm not saying we neglect the more important ones on how we got here, because those are foundational. But we also need to explore those other stories, because that's what brings us together and lets us accept how we were bonded, how we united together.
Yeah, I love that idea of institutions that are looking for areas of commonality, because it feels like more now than ever before we have these things that pull us apart and make us seem like we're disconnected, right? Whether that's within our communities, intra-community, inter-communities, or even with those who are not from our community. So that idea of looking for shared experiences is really, I think, a wise and interesting approach to this. So certainly looking forward to seeing how that materializes over time. We talk a lot about what a 21st century museum is. I mean, we do it here at the MSU Museum. It's maybe to be determined, as we're in the first quarter still of the 21st century. But I know that your institution is working to be a 21st century culturally specific institution. How do you envision kind of your approach to curating content that is both, historically accurate, but is also really looking at, things that resonate with today's young American Latino community? And how does that look in a 21st century museum as you're conceiving this? I understand it's early, but where's the thinking?
It's a great question. We grapple this every year. Every week. We're talking about it right now, and we're developing our next music exhibition in our temporary gallery. It's like, how do we communicate? We know, but from doing surveys. By the way, we have a temporary gallery at American History, National Museum of American History. It's a Molina Family Latino Gallery, and in there we have an exhibit that opened last June, a year and a half ago. It's called Presente, and it's a Latino history of the United States, kind of trying to fit everything to 4,500 square feet, which is almost impossible. But we have we took an incredible approach to this universal design concept where it's a traditional exhibitory cases, but we have digital consoles, we have these big totems where you have one-on-one storytelling and oral histories, life size. We have hands-on interactive. We did a little bit of everything. We have a learning lounge, an educational space. We could stream to the classroom, to schools. We could do programming in there. So we tried a little bit of everything. It's fully accessible for low sight, low vision. And then we do surveys to see what works, which methods work, which tactics work. But the challenge is we don't know in 10 or 12 years what that's going to be, right? Like, how are you going to engage? And it's easier when you're a smaller museum. You say, well, let's try it out this year. Next year, we'll do another exhibit, and we'll try that method out. I'm planning 10 years ahead, and once we commit to it, it's really hard to change at Smithsonian, because you're ordering equipment, you're ordering supplies, you're building a museum that's over 350,000 square feet versus a 4,500 square foot gallery. The public spaces are going to be over 150,000 square feet. So how do you plan for that? That's why everybody says, why does it take 10 years to build a museum? It's like, well, guess what? Each room in that museum is going to need a curator and staff and equipment. It's just a scale. It's an incredible. I'm kind of worried. I'm getting a little worried just thinking about that. like, how am I going to do that? But it's a little daunting, right? I mean, think about that, and then I'm worried about, imagine ordering monitors and screens. They're going to be completely outdated because, think about your TV at home now. It didn't even last 2 years, and you got to buy a new one. You can't even repair it. So we constantly have to be doing that. A good example is, we used QR codes in museums for years before the pandemic, and everybody hated them. Nobody used them. You had to open a separate app. It never worked. The link was dead. And one of the few things that came out of the pandemic we can appreciate is that every restaurant you went to had a QR code. And now it's native to your camera setting, to your camera. You don't have to open an app. You click on it, you click on the menu, you're happy, right? The link works. Well, guess what? Now in museums, you see a QR code, it's not scary anymore. It's not a separate thing. We've evolved in 3 years. Our behavior has evolved where we now accept that that's just, you take it for granted, right? So what's going to be the next QR code? I always tell my staff, next year and the year after that and in 10 years, what is it we're going to take for granted that we know we use every day? What kind of technology? While still maintaining how important it is to have the real object and the artifacts on display. It's scary. Yeah.
It's scary, and I'm not going to lie. I still cringe a little bit with those QR codes because we tried so hard 10 years ago to get people to use them, and now, as you said, it's so ubiquitous and everybody uses them. So a lot of pain in getting to where we are today. Well, you've mentioned the exhibit that is currently on display at the National Museum of American History, and for those of you who might find yourself in D.C. anytime remotely soon, please do check it out. It's really phenomenal. But talk a little bit about how, that is kind of the introduction for a lot of people. And how is that being perceived, and what are you hearing? What are you hearing from people within the community and, all different types of audiences?
Well, the Latino Center, which is now part of the museum, years ago, about 8 or 9 years ago, decided, we should start thinking about building a gallery, a physical presence, our own little mini museum inside American history, because we might not ever get a museum. This legislation is taking forever. It's been 20 years already, and it might not happen for another 20, and they want to see it in their lifetime, right? So they started coming up with the money. They started fundraising. I think they raised over $27 million to build this and sustain it for 10 years and hire staff. So they got the space in American history, and they beautifully done restored space that we paid for. And we opened that first exhibit. And every 2 or 3 years, we're going to rotate and have a different show in there to experiment, try different themes and topics, incubator space type exhibit. So it's very successful for that. But the challenge is, again, how do you fit 500 years of history in 4,500 square feet for such a diverse community? It's really, really tough to do. So you can't, right? And there's always going to be people who are going to say, well, you didn't include me, or you didn't include this story. I have something that belonged to my grandfather, should be in there. If you don't put it in there, you're doing it wrong. So I get it all. We get everything like that. But at the end of the day, most people do appreciate what we have. When we opened that exhibit last June, I had just moved to D.C., and 2 weeks later, we had this grand opening with 600 people in American history in the Flag Hall. First Lady, was there. Dr. Biden was there. And we had Jose Feliciano playing his guitar and singing the national anthem. And it was a surprise. Nobody knew. He was backstage. And I met him for the first time, like, oh, okay. This is a surprise for me, even. So he came on stage and he played. There was not a dry eye in the room, right? But the amazing thing is, I was supposed to go next to speak. And our Board of Regents, our governing board, Steve Case was the chair of the board at the time. This is the guy that founded AOL and all these big companies. And he's like, I want to go next. I think I should go before you. I'm like, knock yourself out, buddy. I said, yeah. There's no way I'm following Jose Feliciano and not a dry eye in that room. It was a tough audience. But what I noticed that night was this incredible support to see their stories being told, whether they agreed on everything that was in the exhibit or not. And then that's Saturday morning when we opened to the public, because that was a private opening. When we opened to the public, we had 2,000 people in the first 2 hours. Imagine that. They couldn't even fit into the space. They were waiting, and when you speak to them, they were like, we came all the way from Texas, we came from San Antonio, we came from Colorado, we came from California, from the Midwest, and then and you came to see this little exhibit, and yes, this is the first time that we knew we were going to have representation here. And there was a line out the door for months to see this gallery. So that speaks a lot about how important this story is. So we might not get it right every time. And I know there's a lot of things that are missing in this exhibit because we're trying to keep up to what expectations are. It's very difficult. But I know that's going to resonate for many people. And then there's always going to be detractors. There's always going to be 1 or 2 people that are the pundits, right? That say, you didn't get it right. But I know there's been over 300,000 people in the past year and a half that have gone through that gallery and enjoyed it. So that's an amazing number.
Congratulations, that's fantastic. A place to call one's own, a place to feel pride, a place to see your story among other stories is truly remarkable. So that's something to be celebrated. One of the things, we're dealing with complex environments today, right? As you're building this, as we're doing everything we do, hyper-politicized environments, just a lot happening, right? And you're building essentially a museum about people, which is truly special. I mean, we always think about museums as being about collections, or we have historically, right? But one of the wonderful things about culturally specific museums, if we can call it that, are they're really about people. I mean, the objects are an extension of the people, but the people are the stories, the histories. It's all kind of centered around that. So I'm wondering, I mean, you know, given all the challenges we face as a society that continue to evolve, you know, is there a role for this museum over time and space to serve as a space for facilitating dialogue and addressing that? Or, I mean, what do you think potentially at some point the Museum of American Latino might be in that space? I mean, would it be a facilitator or a place to dispel or a place to, I mean, how do we do that? We always think about museums as being these places where people can explore ideas, but it's also difficult to do so.
Yeah. Well, you know, right? We were thinking about the other day. We're exploring in our, you know, with our team. What is this museum even going to look like? And you know, it's way early. You know, we need to hire architects and designers and start developing the program once we get the site chosen. But almost everybody in that room said, you know, we got to have a plaza. We got to have a programming space. I don't care if the plaza is indoors or outdoors. That's very common throughout many Latin American and Caribbean communities in Mexico. And I mean, there's always a plaza, right? It's a gathering space. It's a place for conversation, for food and music. But it goes back to that. Can we use a plaza? Can we use some kind of space where people feel they can have those conversations, where we can offer dialogue? Is a plaza outside? Is it in a place that you don't have to go inside the building maybe? Because many people don't like going inside museum buildings. It's a thing. But you know, we get surveys done. It's like, well, you know, I don't feel comfortable going to a government building. I don't think, you know, I prefer being outside. I prefer if you do an outdoor program. So those are all things we need to consider on how we do that. But I think it's pivotal that we do that. I know the National Museum of African American History and Culture does a great job at doing that, having that dialogue and those conversations. And sometimes they're very difficult conversations. If you look at my name today in the media, you know that I've been getting attacked from all sides. That's just part of the job. And you gotta go with thick skin to put up with it. But I always tell everybody, of course there are people that complain about everything, but there are also people that are very passionate. And sometimes it comes across like they're putting down one side of the story or the other. And it's when I have that conversation with them, it's because they're passionate about their story and they want to make sure their morals and their values and their stories are being told equally. And so I respect that. Whether I agree on it or not, or their tactic and how they got my attention, it's always important to listen to everybody, and I've learned that. But I also tell people when I meet with them, look, this exhibit goes back 500 years, because if it wasn't for the story of Mexican Americans in this country and civil rights and rising to make sure they had those rights, you wouldn't have the foundational work to be where you are today as a Cuban American, because you wouldn't have the same rights. That took years to get to the point where we are today, right? And you can't take that for granted. So it's a tough conversation when you got to tell somebody, rethink about, you know, how you think about history and accepting other people. So it's tough.
I love that idea of a plaza. That sounds really remarkable, doesn't it? So this is kind of, I know this is way too premature, but I have to ask, I mean, just as you're thinking about a building, are you then thinking about other elements architecturally to incorporate? And, you know, how might that potentially be reflected? I mean, we're still trying to figure out the site. I know I'm getting way ahead, but like, I'm just really excited to hear. I mean, what I love, if you've been to Washington, D.C., if anyone in here, and you've been to the Museum of the American Indian, I'll tell you what, one of my favorite things is actually the food court. Right? You said it, right? Because you can go through there and you can experience so much through food and culture, right? And I thought that was just really ingenious. So it's nice to see all the different ways that these institutions are thinking about bringing, besides just exhibitions, culture to life. But I'm wondering, I mean, you know, any other thoughts very early in your thinking and your staff's thinking about some things you may incorporate?
You know, we think about it, we talk about it, but just in case, if you don't know, we're still waiting for the site selection for Congress to approve where we're going to build the museum. We picked 2 sites on the mall, both green spaces, and we need congressional approval to build on the mall because it's a Park Service property. It's managed by the Department of Interior. So until we get, and the legislation has said, don't build on the reserve, which is the mall, but look at these sites on the reserve and consider them. So we're kind of this rock and a hard place. So they say, okay, we like those sites, we'll take one of them, but you need permission from us to remove that language. And we've been trying for a year and a half now to get them to pass the wording. It's attached to any kind of bill. But Congress has only passed 7 bills in the past year and a half. such a struggle to get it in there. So we're hoping to get it now in this last quarter before the holiday break. So we're confident it's going to happen, because once that does happen, then we can start considering, okay, we know how big the site is. We know how big the building can be. We know we can start working on the program and some of these elements. When we meet with designers, do we have a design competition with architects? We can explore those different ways to get that look, that building. But we talk about it. We say, we know we want a plaza. We know we're going to have incredible food. There's just no way around it. The problem's going to be, how do you limit, how do you control how many different types of food do you have, because we're so diverse, right? But I know it's consensus. I know food and music, and it's not to be cliche, because we all love food and music in our community, but food and music are excellent ways to communicate, to really share stories, because those are commonalities. Those are things that we do share. And so that's really important for us. I know the next exhibit we're doing in the Molina Gallery is on salsa music. And it's like, well, you're doing it because Celia Cruz and this and that. It's like, no, salsa music, it has African roots going back, hundreds of years. And it's developed in New York and the Puerto Rican sound. And it went to the West Coast. And there's a Texas component to it. There's so many different components to this one genre of music, and that's why we're doing it. And it also helps bring in different collections. We're looking at an amazing vinyl record and a collection from it's all the way in Spain, believe it or not, with hundreds of thousands of songs that we get digitized already. We met with Celia Cruz estate, and they're donating 15 dresses from her collection. So we know that doing these types of exhibits help us build the story for the larger museum in the future. It's not just because I want to do it now, because I want to broaden our scope and actually collect for the future. So it's so you're looking at all these different things, aside from the building. But then when we're developing these stories, then we start thinking, well, if we know these certain themes and topics are going to be important, then you start thinking, well, we need X number of square feet for this kind of space. Do we need a digital library space? Do we need an archive? Do we need a library? I don't know. Museums are different now these days, so we got to consider all that.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about. Thanks for sharing that. Again, inviting folks with questions to send them forward. So I think I have a question that probably several people in this room are contemplating, and that is, how do you plan to involve the American Latino community in the development and ongoing activities of the museum?
Well, one of the most important things for us is that going back to trying to make it a real community museum is really just traveling across the entire United States and continental and Puerto Rico to make sure that we collect the stories. We have somebody in our team right now that's, I think by the end of the year, is going to have visited 65 cities in the past 9 months. It's amazing. I've been, since I started it last year, I've been to at least 6 or 7 different states. I've been to at least 10 or 15, 12 different cities alone. I was in Boise, Idaho 2 weeks ago. I was in Miami last week, and today I'm here. So it's a lot of legwork to get to spread the word, the awareness of what we're doing, and you start building these relationships. And we'll be back in a year or two, and you start meeting with community centers and museums. One thing we want to make sure is that we're not extractive. We're not going to the community and saying, okay, we're taking your story, we're taking your oral history, we're collecting from your archives, or taking your artifacts back to DC, and you're never going to see them again. And that's the last thing we want to do. So I'll give you an example of one thing we're doing. We partnered last year in the Cheech Museum, Cheech and Chong fame. He is an incredible collector. Cheech Marin is an incredible collector in Latin American art, and he donated a lot of his collection to the Riverside Art Museum, and he created his own museum, the Cheech Museum, in Riverside, California. It's amazing. It's beautiful. So we partnered with that museum, and there's an exhibition there that was there last year. It opened last year. De la Torre Brothers. It's a beautiful glass blowing exhibit. And it was only going to show there. So we found money through the Smithsonian, through our museum, to fund that exhibition to travel to 6 different museums across the United States. So now these Latino artists are going to have their show in small museums. It's going to be in El Paso. I think it's opening next week in El Paso, Corpus Christi, in Oklahoma. And then it's going to the Corning Art Museum, Glass Museum in Corning, New York. Would never have gone there with our friend Carol. Yeah. So, that wouldn't happen unless we, lifted that story, right, and supported that story. So that's the thing that we're going to continue doing over the next decade, and making sure that we're not only going to community, but asking you, what are you doing that you need help with, to make sure that we can help support you.
That's a really great approach. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about our conversations with Diana Rivera and her family, and thinking about Oftentimes it feels like a lot of the stories become also focused, like it's great to hear you talking about Boise, about kind of urban experiences, right? And it's harder, just to get out as you're building a new museum to get kind of more of the rural stories. I mean, how is that as you're kind of getting out? Is there an effort to do both urban and rural as part of the diversity and the makeup of the institution, or
Yeah,
how do you go about deciding like where, I guess is what I'm asking, because you only have so much time. How do you focus getting out across this country?
Yeah. Well, we haven't even launched that road trip experience yet, believe it or not. That's just preliminary work we're doing, where we've been to all these places, either for meetings or cultivation or fundraising, which we can talk about later. But one way we're doing it is that we have a preliminary planning grant to do a museo móvil, a mobile museum. So for the next 10 years, we can take it on the road. So Adrian, which works on our education team, he's the one that's been visiting all these communities across the U.S., and we're surveying, where are these Latino populations, not only existing metropolitan cities, smaller neighborhoods, growing cities. I think came out the other day, Pew Research, the largest influx of Hispanics is Venezuelan, and Kentucky has the largest number of Cubans ever now. It's the largest growing Cuban communities in Louisville, Kentucky. It's like 32,000 people, and I'm jealous. They have 2 Cuban restaurants. There's none in D.C. I'm hurting, so this is not fair. But when you see those numbers and we use stats and we use surveys, we know where people want us to go, and it's a lot of places. So with this Museo Movi grant, he's going to these communities, 65 different cities, to ask them, what is it? How can we serve you? How can this museum be part of your community for the next 10 years? And he'll be driving around in a school bus that's converted into a museum for the next 8 or 9 years, trying to engage communities. And then I'll follow up and meet them there and actually do cultivation events and fundraising events to make sure we cover all our bases.
I love that sound of a museum on wheels. That's really great.
Yeah.
So I have a couple questions as it relates to just your partnerships with other institutions. I guess the first is, it's really great, I imagine, being part of the Smithsonian and having colleagues like Lonnie and a museum that's still relatively new, that's about kind of the African-American experience. And then, of course, we have, as we alluded to earlier, the Museum of the American Indian. Having these colleagues who have built similar institutions really within, the last 20 years, I believe, American Indian. I mean, how does that also inform, or doesn't, your work? I mean, having these colleagues, what kind of experiences and knowledge can you draw from what they've done as you're thinking about with your team how we go about doing this?
Yeah. Well, we're fortunate. For those of you that don't know, our secretary, Lonnie Bunch III, he's also the founding director of the African American Museum. It opened 16 years ago, and that took about 13 years to build. So if you have some time for some casual reading, he has a book called A Fool's Errand, Building the National Museum of African History and Culture. And I read that book and I still took this job, but I was, but it's a great read, by the way. It's an easy read, and it's amazing what he went through for 13 years, and through three different presidents to build this museum and I think he raised almost, total project was about $750 million. I think he raised over $400 million. So it was a big achievement. And he's our secretary now. He's my boss. So, we get to have him there at least for a few more years to help us. What is that blueprint? Even though you don't have the exact steps, at least you can ask him, what should I do about this? Or how did you go about that? And you have that book. It really is like a Bible for building a national museum. It's amazing. But you also have some colleagues that have been there for 20, 30, 40 years that were they were deputy directors or they were curators in that museum. They were in the field collecting 20 years ago, doing the same things that we're doing now. And so my team can call them up and say, hey, how did you go about securing collection space? How did you go about building your team, hiring? So it's an amazing connection that we have. We're so fortunate, because if it wasn't for that, it would really be much more daunting.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear that, because as you were describing that, I was thinking again about kind of the Arab American Museum experience. And when that was being founded by Dr. Anand Amari, the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles was really instrumental in giving the blueprint, so to speak, on how to build this for the Arab American community, and really lent their expertise and their knowledge to say, here's how we did it. Now we're paying it forward. So I think, that ability to have those kinds of colleagues and to learn from one another is so critical, because this concept of just creating a museum, I mean, I run a museum that's been around for 167 years. I mean, what does that mean to build a new museum? So I think it's really rich to have those kinds of colleagues, and I'm glad that you read the book and are staying with it, so that's great. You're still going. But
By the way, I've read it about 3 times already.
oh,
You have to keep going back to it. I have notes. I have a digital version now too, and I highlight passages in there. I'm like, why did I do this?
I think that book is going to be an artifact in the museum when you open it. So again, drawing on kind of Lonnie and building the museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, so having worked in Greater Detroit, before that museum existed, the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit was actually the largest museum. That was an African American museum in the country. And there was a lot of concern. There was a lot of concern about this new institution being in Washington, D.C. Would it impact us? Would there be a collaborative relationship? Are you finding that from other American Latino museums across the country or anything else, that there's some fear that you're hearing as you're being built as a national Smithsonian brand, or do some people see it as opportunity? I imagine there's a little of each, but what does that feel like, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah. We haven't heard any feedback yet, negative feedback. I'm sure there are some Latino communities serving museums, right? Most of them are art museums. Have an incredible museum in Chicago with Mexican art. There's some in Texas, there's some in California, but they're mostly community based. It's regional. It's the story at the local level or about Latin American art, but it's not national. And and I bet it's because it's really hard to do that, right? They're thinking how we're going to represent people in South Florida or New York, or when I'm in Texas. It's not that easy because most museums that are regional or local level really rely on local stories to help tell that narrative, push that narrative. So I don't think it's a negative thing. We have heard from some people like, why don't you just give us the money and build 4 or 5 different museums across the U.S. and instead of building one big one in the nation. It's like, well, there's 2 reasons. First, because that's challenging to manage 5 museums under one name, and it's also. It does an injustice to the Latino community where you're saying our story should be just regional and not at a national level. It should be on the National Mall alongside other museums that have that kind of representation. Right.
So we're getting some questions.
All right.
And as I have a chance to digest these real quick, I want you to maybe go just a step further with that last point, because I think that's super super interesting to me, again, because I was at an Arab American National Museum, but we were in Dearborn, Michigan. And our founding director used to always tell the story that it was really critical because Dearborn was the heart of Arab America. We often got, why not Washington, D.C.? And that was a critical tension till the day I departed 13 years after it was open. People still ask that question. So I'm really interested in the way you're saying that. What do you think that historical significance will be? Why Washington, D.C.? I mean, obviously the Smithsonian, but the Anacostia is the one Smithsonian museum that's really community-based. It's not on the National Mall. It's out actually in the Anacostia community. So what does that mean, do you think, for American Latino communities to have that presence in D.C. versus somewhere in the South, the Southwest, or a major urban area in the Midwest? I don't know.
Well, it comes down to if you don't have a museum in your community that that represents you or anyone. And many communities don't have a history museum, an art museum, or a cultural museum, and you do visit D.C. and many people do visit Washington D.C. It's a pilgrimage for many people. It's something you do in close-up program in middle school, or you do for a senior trip, and for many people that's going to be their first exposure to a national museum. So it makes sense that the first time you go there, you should see a Latino museum there, and that's something that was missing when I went when I was 18, 19 years old. I love the museums, but I didn't see anything about immigrants, or I didn't see anything about my Cuban family coming here in the 60s. I didn't see anything about, my story. So I saw the potential. So now when people come back, and we're doing this for not only my kids, my grandkids, and your next 3, 4, 5, 6 generations. These museums are going to be there for hundreds of years. And that says a lot too. They're there for life. When we collect stuff, when we tell these stories, it's for, we hate to say it's forever. And that's a big responsibility to pay for that and to maintain that. And I think a national museum has that responsibility and has the resources to do that versus a museum in a private community or in a community where it may be private and it may be gone in 10 or 15 years. You just don't know what's going to happen locally. So that's important.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, that again, that idea of a place that represents our stories, that we're telling our own story is really, really interesting, or seeing that reflection of yourself in a museum. And I know a lot of ethnic and culturally specific museums are typically built for that very reason, right? So this kind of segues into a question from our audience. What will a Michigan story or a Great Lakes story on Mexican and Latinos tell, if at all, and who will tell it?
By the way, I see a big stack of questions there coming from the audience. I'm a little concerned about. No, it's a great question. Yeah, and I think it's a question that every community is going to ask. And we're going to have to figure that out either through a partnership with your museum, with a museum somewhere nearby, because we can't answer that. We're going to have to work with you and figure out what are the important stories to tell in this community here in this state, and of course across 50 states and territories. It's going to be a challenge, and we can't have 55 different rooms, right? So it has to be, how do you unify those stories and make sure you include them? But even if you go to the Presente Gallery today, you start looking at what's featured in there, you'll see a little bit of everything. It's amazing how we pick out geographic representation, diversity, different heritages, different cultures, different people. And you can find almost everything in there. Somebody called me the other day and said, do you have anything in Brazil? I bet you don't have anything in Brazil. I was like, yeah, we actually, the next rotation, we have a piece from Brazil, and we're going to have Portuguese label in there. So you can't, we're trying to be as inclusive as we can. But it's going to be a challenge. But it's going to, again, be about, we can't do that. And we can't have so many curators that cover every possible topic, but we're going to have people in the field making those connections with you to figure out which ones we should tell.
So kind of bending that a little bit further, again, it's very early. We all realize that. But what is one or two ways you have found successful in engaging with community stakeholders as you begin this work?
Yeah. Well, one thing that we're doing earlier than I wanted to, but it's really to address some of the concerns people have had already about what stories we're going to tell, and some of the, are you too liberal, are you too conservative? A lot of stuff you read in the paper. So I've started having town hall meetings and listening circles with certain communities, just to invite everyday people from the community, invite scholars, invite local political leaders in the community, politicians, their staff, just anybody we could find. And we'll spend 2 or 3 days in each city so far to try to figure out, how do we engage, how do we have this ongoing conversation, and make it clear to them it's not going to be just a one-time thing. It's 10, 12 years of really going back and forth, but opening that line of communications is so important. I know that so far, and like once a month I have to go to Capitol Hill and testify and talk to people and try to get funding or listen to their complaints. And most of the time when I have honest conversations with them, and sometimes very difficult conversations, you walk out of the room with a different understanding of like where you're coming from. I respect your values and where you're coming from, but they also respect that as a Smithsonian, we need to maintain that curatorial integrity where we're the ones that are in charge of telling the story. And it's really hard for some people, because everybody has like a laundry list of things that you need to include in there. And if you don't do it, you don't get money. And it's just not the way it works. So we have to hold our ground and make sure that curatorial integrity is so important. So, but when we go into the communities, again, I was in Miami last week for a conference, but 2 of the nights that we were there, we actually went and met with 2 completely different groups, different ends of the political spectrum, and just to have those conversations, and they were grateful for it. They're saying, this is the first time that somebody's actually come from the Smithsonian to our community, not to Capitol Hill, and actually engage with us in our town, and that's really important.
So I have a feeling I know who this question came from, but it's a good one. Are you working with Latinx student studies programs as you develop the vision for this at all?
Yeah, again, going back to Latino Center, we're fortunate. We developed years ago a Latino Museum Studies program at the Smithsonian, and it's been an amazing way. As Deanna indicated, she served as a mentor, right, for a fellow. It's so important. That Museum Studies program is creating that pipeline of people that are invested into our story, and they come back, serving as fellows. But these are future curators for the exhibit, for a museum, future conservators, historians. I visit museums across the U.S. and I run into museum studies interns or alumni almost every time. It's amazing. We served over 500 interns in the past, I don't know how many years already we've been doing this. I think it's going to be 10 years next year. And we started with a museum internship. It used to be graduate students. Then it was now it's undergraduate students also. And next year we're starting a new program with funding from IMLS to actually bring in high school seniors. So here we're offering a fully paid internship where you go to Washington, D.C., we give you housing, we actually place you to work in a museum, and then you go back to your community and do an internship in a museum there. So it's an incredible connection. And then we work with museum studies programs across the nation. So if you have any interest in partnering with us, we work with museum studies programs to make sure that we have students coming in. And it's a very competitive process. And we pick about 20 to 25 students every year in the summer and the fall. And they love it. It's a life-changing experience for them. And the majority of them stay in the museum field. So we're creating that. It's a necessary, like I said, pipeline of future museum workers that do not exist today. I need to build a team where I'm now at my museum, and I started with 17 staff members that were at the Latino Center. We're about 23, 24 now. And eventually, in a few years, I'm gonna have over 100 staff. And eventually, I'm gonna have over 150. Guess what? Everybody's saying you better hire Latinos in those positions. Like, guess what? They don't exist. I hate to say it. There's not many people working in this field. And the ones that are already have jobs. So I either got to take them from somewhere else or lure them over, or I got to create that pipeline. So when in 5 or 6 years, when I'm trying to find a conservator or curator, they've already have the experience I need.
That is such an important story. We dealt with that at the American National Museum and just about every other kind of culturally specific institution I've talked to. You know, folks come into those institutions mainly because they're passionate about their culture or another culture. They're not necessarily trained in what we consider museum work. So building that, an empowering community to have those skills so that they can do that. In fact, we were just having a conversation with various communities here on campus, including the Native American community in a call recently about how do we find ways to do training. So, but if I'm not mistaken, the IMLS also has kind of another new program they just launched this year to encourage museums to work with Chicano, Latino, Latinx studies programs just for that same cause. So. Right. Are you optimistic that this will bear fruit and hopefully give you the workforce you need?
Yeah, it does. As part of that legislation in 2020, there was additional funding provided to Institute of Museum and Library Sciences to make sure they support Latino serving community, museums that support Latino serving communities. So it wouldn't just be our museum getting the funding. So that was really important. And I think a similar thing was done with the African American Museum. So a grant just went out, the applications just went out for that one. And I've gotten calls from people saying, is this part of your museum? It's like, no, it's separate. You're going to get money to serve your community and Latino American community. And so that's really important that we have this additional source. But it also creates awareness about what we're trying to do at a national level. And it's been very positive.
So you talked a little bit about this, but since it was asked, maybe see if there's anything additional you'd like to ask. As you think about the types of stories that will make it into the narrative of the museum, or perhaps ones that are paused, what is is there a community involvement? Will there be a community involvement? Will that be all professional staff? How do you envision over time and space? There's so many different models, right, within the museum field. How do you kind of determine at the institution you're building on how you're gonna, at what level do you involve community in some of that process, and at what point is it more professional staff?
Yeah. Well, we have our staff that makes, in collaboration with a committee of scholars that looks into different possible topics and research, and our committee of scholars committee is well-respected academics from all over the U.S. that come in every 3 or 4 months to D.C. and meet with us for 2 or 3 days to learn, what is it we're doing? What does a museum look like? How do you build an exhibit? How do you produce an exhibit? Because most of them don't have that experience, right? They're usually academic, or they want to learn. So we bring experts in to teach them how that works. So it's a learning experience for them. It's a learning experience for us to see how they do their research and see what they can contribute to us. So it's going to be a combination of community-based, surveys, scholars, art curators, myself, higher-ups, Lonnie, my bosses, to see how we shape this. But I look at it as two different. There's 2 different strategies. One is short-term, and I say short-term, it means the next 10 years. What exhibits we work on and what we do, and then eventually which exhibits or what's a larger exhibition that's going to be in the permanent museum when it opens. And there's a different approach, and the reason for that is The exhibitions I'm developing now are to build collections. They're for fundraising. They're to bring people in and encourage them to participate, for raising awareness of what we're doing. So I need to keep that in mind. And people complain and criticize me all the time. It's like, all you want to do is raise money. It's like, no, I have to raise money. I need to raise over $500 million to build this museum. This thing's going to cost over $1 billion. The other half is appropriations to Congress. And $500 million is not a small number, you know. And we're at 60 million already in 1 year. So it's not that I'm money hungry, but I am. You know, I need to do this. This is the only way this is going to happen. So I need to be constantly looking at the big picture on how we get there. So it's easily to be detracted from that and saying, well, why don't you do something else? Or why don't you take a pause on that and let's look at, you know, another subject matter. It's like I need constantly, I tell everybody every day, look at the big picture. Look at the big picture. I know it's not what you want to hear. I know you want to work on certain projects because they're very important. All those stories and all the projects will be told in the final museum when it opens in 10 or 12 years. And I think to me that's much more important than the short term.
Thank you. I think we have time for one additional question. So finally, I mean, here we are celebrating National Hispanic Heritage Month. What message would you like to impart to the younger generation of American Latinos and the wider community about the significance and contributions of Latinos in the United States?
Well, we've mentioned this today already about representation and seeing their stories being told. And it sounds repetitive, but every time I go into the Molina Gallery and I see someone that's a lot younger than me come into that space and appreciate, you know, that connection, appreciate that, you know, they're 19, 20, 22 years old, 25 years old, and they can see, you know, I have this in common. I know I could resonate. You know, this resonates with me. This is my story. I know my parents went through this. I know my grandparents did this. That is so special and another level I've never seen before. And that's why I know that that goal of opening a museum in 10 to 12 years is attainable. It is doable, because that's the next generation that's really going to support what we're doing. And I always tell people it's not just for fundraising. That's our future, right? About not only in philanthropy, but in everything we do, in work, academics, and this growing field of over 63 million Latinos in the United States. I mean, you look at the stats. We have the 5th largest GDP in the world, I think, just the revenue generated by Latinos. It's bigger than France, England. It's crazy how much we generate. And that's important, and that's not, no one knows those things, right? And when they see that, when somebody goes in there that's younger and sees how powerful we are when we're united, when we have these things in common, when we excel, when we do what we're supposed to do, when it's recognized, which is the most important thing, I think that's going to be the takeaway for younger generations.
Well said. Well, I think on behalf of all the Michigan State University and our campus community, we're incredibly grateful that you've come all the way up from Washington, D.C., during an immensely busy time to spend some time with us here in the WKAR studios tonight. So please give Jorge a round of applause on behalf of MSU.
Thank you so much.
We also want to thank the Rivera family through the Rivera Endowment for their support in making this a reality. Here's to many more. Our heartfelt gratitude, of course, to WKAR for hosting us and for helping produce tonight's evening, as well as the Chicano Latino Studies program, who we also look forward to partnering to. So, thank you all for coming out tonight. And if you haven't, please make sure you visit museum.msu.edu to learn more about the programs and activities we have coming up from now until the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you.